Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshops, where we get together in the middle of the week and learn more about technology. March 31st is Worldwide Backup Day, and APCUG spends the month of March, because we know it takes more than one saying, focusing on backups. Because as the sign says behind me, that data loss is just around the corner. Every one of us at some point in time, for some reason, you're going to lose data. And we have been focusing this month on backing up your important data. And today we're going to continue with a feature speaker today on backing up. And then we'll have in our second half, 3 people presenting different tools that you can use to do some of your backup. It's a real pleasure for me to always welcome back Mark Schulman. Been here many times presenting, has presented to many of your groups and keep asking for it. Mark is a member of the Central Florida Computer Society. He's an author, speaker, web designer, teacher, software designer, and technology enthusiast, like a lot of us. He's designed software and web applications for business, from small medical practices to even big Fortune 500 companies. In addition, Mark speaks on a wide variety of technology issues. And if that's not enough, he even is an author of 7 computer books, including Using Unix, Understanding Unix, and Using Lotus Notes, all published by Q, a division of Macmillan McGraw-Hill. He's taught a wide range of programming courses for major corporations, worked on large software development projects. He currently manages the IT department for a small company that does clinical drug trials and computers for a small medical practice. His major geek interest these days is in the computer technology that made moon landings. If you haven't heard him talk about these, you've got to get that presentation from him. That these moon landings back in the 1960s, in the beginning of technology. And he's been working on his own reproduction of the Apollo guidance computer. But today, Mark is here to talk to us and has the background for helping us understand backing up in the modern society. So Mark, take it over and teach us more about technology.
Great, thanks, John. All right, let me share my screen. See if I can get that piece of technology to work. All right, I assume everybody can see my screen. If you can't, somebody holler.
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, great. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why we need backups, and we're going to look at several backup techniques. I'll do a couple demos, and then I know you've got some other people lined up to do some demos. So this ought to be a productive afternoon, I hope. So a little bit about myself. First of all, as John mentioned, I'm the IT manager for a small medical practice, and I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And I really love working for a small company. I've been doing some kind of information technology for over 40 years now, so I've been at this for quite a while. So today we're going to talk, one other thing, let me just mention, I'm going to mention several products as we go, some various disk drives that I'll recommend, and also several pieces of software. And the one thing I want everybody to understand is I don't have any affiliation with any of these companies. So I'm just going to recommend some things that I've used that I've found useful. There's lots and lots of options out there. So if you can find something you like better, that's fantastic. Okay, so the problem we've got is that, as John mentioned, all hard drives are going to eventually fail. Whether they're spinning hard drives, whether they're SSDs, eventually they're going to go bad. Several years ago, there's a company called Backblaze that runs a data center that had, at the time, about 41,000 hard drives. And so they undertook a study to figure out if there were certain makes and models of hard drives that were more prone to errors. And what they found is that in some models, excuse me, they had as high as a 26% annual failure rate. So in other words, if you had one of these hard drives and if you had 4 of them, then the chances were every year one of them was going to go bad. So that's how high the failure rate on some of these can be. Now, most hard drives are very reliable, but every single one of them will eventually go bad. If you're interested in reading the report, there's a link at the bottom of the screen there, and these slides will be available so you don't have to take notes and write this stuff down. It's a fascinating but lengthy report that goes manufacturer by manufacturer and talks about the failure rates that they've experienced. So other than hard drives going bad, there's lots of different ways you can lose your data. The computer itself can fail, and sometimes this can be pretty spectacular. I've seen power supplies catch fire, and so people lose their hard drives because the whole computer caught fire. That one's spectacular. You can accidentally delete stuff. So even if the computer and the hard drive and everything are working perfectly, you can make a mistake and delete things. And I've done this more times than I can count. If you've got a laptop, the computer can be lost or stolen. Even if it's not a laptop, it can be lost or stolen. You can experience fire or flood. I'm in Central Florida. We get hurricanes occasionally. And when I was about 4 years old, we had my parents had a house in South Orlando, and I've still got pictures to this day of the water knee deep. And I don't mean my knees, I mean adult knees. The water was knee deep in our house, and that happened twice. So, and obviously back in the 1960s, nobody had personal computers, but if we had, there's a very good chance that that would have been the end of those computers. And lastly, malware. And this is a serious problem these days. And perhaps the most common way you're going to lose data based on malware is via ransomware. And I hope none of you have ever experienced it, but we've got a large enough crowd that there's a good chance that some of you have. You get this virus on your computer that goes through and encrypts all your files, and then you get a screen like this that says if you don't send the money within a certain number of days, you'll never see your files again. In this case, they only want $300, which is actually pretty cheap for malware these days. But some very large companies have paid huge sums of money because they didn't have backups and they got hit by malware, and they were facing losing all of their customer data. And so they actually paid, in one case I remember, it was $1 million to get all their data back. So malware is something you really got to be worried about. And imagine what it would be like for you if you lost all your data, all your documents, photos, videos, letters, spreadsheets, financial data, tax returns, you name it, all gone. The thing I'd be most heartbroken about is my photos and videos. I figure everything else I can replace somehow with enough work, but photos and videos, if I lost that, I'd just be crushed. So if you wound up with some catastrophe where your computer wouldn't boot, your hard drive appeared to be damaged, you might get lucky. So you can buy these devices that allow you to take a hard drive out of your computer and plug them into a USB port on a working computer. They don't cost very much. There's some other ways you can do similar things that cost nothing. And somebody might be able to fish most or all of your data off that hard drive if the drive itself has not failed. If the drive did actually fail, you still might get lucky. There are companies that will, their line of business is to fish data off of failed hard drives. And this is very specialized and expensive work. You might pay thousands of dollars, but you might eventually be able to get most or all of your data back. But sometimes your luck just runs out. When I mentioned earlier the computer catching fire, this is likely what your hard drive is going to look like. If your house burns to the ground, this is what you may be faced with, and there's no way you're going to get any data off of there. So the solution to all of these problems is backups, and let's talk about backups. So a backup is just a copy of your data. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. And we're going to talk about how you might organize that process because your data changes. I'm constantly taking new photos and new videos, constantly generating new documents. And I want to make sure that I always have copies of it. Most people don't make backups. Businesses almost always do, but people typically don't. There's probably more. This group may be a little different because everybody here is some flavor of computer enthusiast. But if you just survey the general public, the vast majority of people don't make backups. But the problem is nothing else will do. There's nothing that can substitute for a backup. If you looked at all those problems that I talked about you encountering, a backup is a solution to every one of them, and there's nothing you can do that will solve all of those problems other than doing backups. I found this quote many years ago, and I wish I could remember a source, but I can't. But I love this quote. If you don't make backups, you don't own your files. You're just borrowing them from fate. If you work with computers long enough, you're eventually going to lose your data, and your backup will be your only hope. So just crucial. So for people, for consumers like us, the ideal backup is convenient, reliable, secure, and inexpensive. Those are the four things we're after. Now, as someone who's responsible for backups at a business, I can tell you that these aren't always the same priorities that a business would have. For example, it's somebody's job at work to do the backups. They're getting paid for it. I don't really care if it's convenient for them. I'm much more concerned about the reliability and the security, especially working in a medical office. I don't care quite so much about whether or not it's inexpensive. I care about that a little bit, but I really don't care about it being convenient. But the problem is, for us consumers, if it's not convenient, we're not going to do it. And so the most important thing is that you do it, and therefore it has to be reasonably convenient. So I'm going to show you techniques here to try to make it convenient. A widely accepted rule of thumb in backups is what's known as the 3-2-1 rule. And everything we're going to look at in here is going to try to follow this rule. So what's the 3-2-1 rule? Well, you should have at least 3 copies of your data. It should be on at least 2 different media. And the issue here is there's nothing more heartbreaking than losing all the data on your computer, and you turn to your one backup hard drive and realize that it's gone bad too. And that happens more than you'd think. So don't ever depend on doing all of your backups onto the same external hard drive or to the same online service or whatever. You always need to have backups in multiple places. And finally, at least one of them needs to be off-site. And the thing that we talk about when we talk about backups is, what are you going to do if your house burns to the ground? And I hope it doesn't happen to anybody in this presentation, but I've known people to whom it has happened. The most recent one, it was probably about 5 years ago. I had some good friends and they had a chimney fire. And they just had their chimney cleaned, so it wasn't anything they did wrong, but the chimney caught fire and it wound up burning down their house, and they wound up losing their computer. Fortunately, they had a backup. The insurance company bought them a new computer. They put their backup back, and all was well. But the important thing was that one of the copies had to be off-site. If it had been in the house, then the backup would have burned up as well. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different strategies for doing backups, and hopefully you'll be able to pick and choose from some of these strategies and find something that will keep your data safe. So probably the most common strategy number 1, is to back up your files to a flash drive, to an external hard drive, or to a NAS, which is network attached storage. A NAS is a fairly expensive device that you can get and put on your network. I'm not going to talk in any kind of detail about those. We're going to focus mostly on external hard drives. Flash drives are great for doing backups, except most of them aren't big enough to hold everybody's data. With people taking photos and videos and that sort of thing, flash drives just don't work. So we're going to talk about external hard drives the most. So what we want to do is we want to make copies of all our data on a regular basis to a flash drive or to an external hard drive. We want to make sure that all of our important files are copied, and this is easiest if you use something called synchronization software, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So synchronization software is software that's smart enough that after you've been doing backups, once you've gotten started with backups, it can look at your hard drive and it can look at your backup drive and it can just find the files that have changed or that are new. And if you think about it, I've got tens of thousands of photos, but most of them never change. They're backed up onto my backup media, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So they're already backed up, and maybe in a week I might take, if there's some event, if there's a wedding or something that I go to, then maybe I take a couple hundred new photos, but the vast majority of my photos never changed. So synchronization software will look to see, is there anything new or anything that's changed? And if so, then I need to copy that to the hard drive, to the backup hard drive. But if nothing's changed, I don't need to copy anything. So only copies things that are new or different. Some of my favorite software to do this, the one I like the best is Free File Sync, and that's the one I use. As the name implies, it's free. There's also Good Sync, and Good Sync I use at work for some things. At work, we have to get the paid version, but I believe there's a free version. And SyncBack, and we also use SyncBack. That's what we use for our major backups every night. And there is a free version of SyncBack as well. Again, since we're a business, we have to get the paid version. So I want to do a quick demo and show you how I do a backup with Free File Sync. All right, so for my files, I've already installed Free File Sync on my computer, but I haven't done anything with it yet. So all of the files that I want to back up are in this folder called Mark. And I put all of my files there. And actually, this is just demo data. If I did all of my data, this would take forever. So I've just got some folders here that I've created. And pay no attention to the man behind the curtain there. And I've got an external hard drive plugged in here. It's my G drive. It's already got a folder on it, but we don't need to bother with that. And I want to create a folder on my backup drive where I'm going to put my backups. Well, how about if I create a new folder and just call it backups? All right, so I'm going to run Free File Sync. And here's the screen I get. So all I have to do is put in on this side the folder that I want to back up. So I can browse for it. And there it is right there on my E drive. It's the Mark folder, and I want to back up all of that. So I'm just going to click Select Folder. So it's got E/Mark up in that first box. And over here, I'm going to browse for my backup drive. And that's my G drive. And I want to put it in the Backups folder. Select Folder, and there we go. Okay, so this is my first backup. The first thing I'm going to click is I'm going to click Compare, and that causes it to look at all of my files on the left-hand side in the Mark folder, and what files does it need to copy to the Backups folder? Well, because this is my first backup, it's going to need to copy all of them. So I click Compare, and it chugs for a minute, and it comes back, and it says, you've got 640 files, and they all need to be copied. And if I scroll through this list, you'll see there's a green arrow with a plus next to every file, because for this initial backup, it's got to copy everything. So I'm going to click Synchronize, and again, it tells me it's going to copy 640 files, and I click Start, and it just starts copying, and it draws me this cool little graphic while it's doing it. And it doesn't actually take very long here because these are all small files. If I were doing this on my real live data, then this would actually take a couple hours to copy everything. Okay, if I now go look on my backup drive and I look in my backups folder, all the folders that were on my in my mark directory on my E drive, they're all here. So it made a copy of everything. Now, let's say now, so I did that on a Sunday, let's say, and now as the week progresses, I'm actually going to make some changes. So I'm going to go into my mark folder, and in here, I've got a folder called Study. And here are things I like to read about. And one of them is mountain climbing. Now, I'd like to make it absolutely clear. I love reading about mountain climbing. I've got lots and lots of books on mountain climbing. I have absolutely no desire to actually do it. So I'm going to open this, this Word document called mountainclimbing.docx. And I've got a bunch of notes in there about mountain climbing. And I'm just going to make a quick change. Oh, gosh, I don't know. I'll delete this row in this column. And I'll save that. Doesn't matter what I change, but I changed something. That's the important thing. All right. And then I'm going to go over into my projects folder, and I'm going to, I've got this PowerPoint presentation here. I'm going to open that up. Oh, it opened on my other monitor. There we go. And I'm just going to make a quick change to that as well. Okay, now the following Sunday rolls around and it's time to do a backup again. So I run free file sync. And again, I hit compare. And it chugs for a second and it says, these are the only two files that have changed. So all I need to do is copy those two files. And it shows me how big they are. And I click synchronize. And bam, just almost instantaneously, it does it, because that's all it had to do so that my mark folder on my hard drive matched my backup folder. So that's free file sync, and I really love it. But wait, there's more. So I've done this many times. Let me show you a problem. I'm going to go back to my mountain climbing document. Mountain climbing. And let's say I've got this table here and I want to delete this one line, but my mouse cursor slips and I wind up selecting multiple lines and I delete it and I don't realize that I've done it. So I save it. And the following Sunday comes along, I run free file sync. I do a compare. It says you need to copy that file. Of course I do. I let it back it up. And then let's say a couple weeks later, I realize what I've done. Well, I go look at my backup and I think maybe I've got the correct version without all those deletions on my backup. And I go look at my backup and I open the document on my backup. And oh no, the data is missing there as well. So one of the cool things that a good backup program, including free file sync, will do is something called versioning. So what I'm going to do, and I've actually got a slide with all these directions on it, so you don't need to make any notes about this. I'm going to go to the settings and I'm going to go to versioning and I'm going to tell, oops, forgot to do something. I got to create a directory where it can put the versions or a folder. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to select that folder. And I'm going to change this to timestamp file. And I'm going to save that. Okay, so let's pretend that I'm going to change another file. So study, mountain climbing. I'm going to pull up this spreadsheet. So these are all the mountains that are over 8,000 meters in height. And I'm going to add, let's say a new mountain has appeared. And it's exactly 8,000 meters. And it's in the Himalayas. And it's located in Nepal, let's say. Okay, now I want you to notice that this has got that new line here. Okay, and then it comes time to do my backups. And I go to Free File Sync, and I do a compare. And it says the only file that's changed is that spreadsheet, and I'm going to say back it up. All right, so if I go look on my backup, and I go to backups, and I go to study, and I go to mountain climbing, and I open that spreadsheet, you can see it's got the new line in it. But suppose later I say, you know, it turns out that that mountain isn't really 8,000 meters, so it shouldn't be on the list. I wish I had a copy of the file the way it was before I added that line. Well, it turns out that I do. If I go to my backup drive and I go into the versions folder, and it didn't do it. What did I do wrong?
I think you want to make the change now and then save it again.
Yeah. Yep. Huh. All right. Well, let's try it again. I love live demos. Let's try making another change to a different file. So I'll go back to my mountain climbing file, and I'll delete a couple lines in that table. All right, Free File Sync, compare. It says you just need to copy that one file. Yes. All right, and it did it. All right, let's see if this worked. All right, so I'm going to look on my backup drive. I'm going to go into versions, and I have no idea why that's not working. That is weird. Let me look at my crib notes. You know, this is the kind of thing where you usually set it up and then you never do it again. Did I miss something? I don't know what I missed, but I'll figure it out while some of the other presentations are going on. Oh, it's got no folder there. All right, let's try it one more time. I'm going to, I'll try it one more time. If this doesn't work, then I'll do some research, figure out what the issue is. Let's see, what can I change? I'll delete a line from this spreadsheet. Well, that won't work. Delete a couple of lines. There we go. There it goes. Okay, so under versions, it created a folder called study, and in there is a folder called mountain climbing, and in there is 8,000 meter peaks, and what it is it's a copy of the file the way it was before it did the backup. So every time you do a backup, every file that has changed that's going to get backed up, it will also keep a copy of the original file the way it was before you made the change. So what this means is if you delete a bunch of data or if you make some mistake and then later you realize, oh gosh, I wish I had the original file back. It will. In the versions directory will be a copy of the file. And I do this, and it's helped numerous times where I've made a mistake in a document, it's gotten backed up, and then maybe a month later, I realize it's got some mistake in it and I want the original document back. Okay. Whew. So again, here's instructions on how to set that up. And if I just followed the instructions, it would have been fine. In addition to using something like synchronization software, there's specialized software specifically for doing backups. One that I like that's free is Aomi Backupper. I hate the name, but I love the software. And this is actually what we use at work to make backups. So it's been very reliable for us. A few points to keep in mind when you're using backup software to an external hard drive is always have at least 2 backup hard drives and alternate between them. I actually have 3 at home. At work, we have 5, and we rotate them. So every night, we use a different backup at work. And every week at home, I rotate amongst the 3 backups, because you don't ever want to find out that your backup hard drive has failed and your backup is no good right when you need it. Don't leave backup drives connected to the computer when they're not in use. This is really important. If you get malware and your backup hard drive is connected to your computer, the malware may go destroy your backup drive as well. So you should connect the hard drive, do your backup, then disconnect it and put it away. And speaking of putting it away, store the external hard drives as physically separate from your computer as possible. So what I do is my computer is pretty much at one end of the house. When I do a backup, I take the backup hard drive and I store it on a shelf that's at the opposite end of the house. The idea there is that if I have a fire and part of the house burns to the ground, it's pretty rare that an entire house burns to the ground. You know, usually the fire department will get there in enough time to put the fire out before it completely guts the house. So what I'm hoping is if the end of the house that has my computer in it burns to the ground, then maybe my backup hard drives will be okay in the other end of the house. And finally, schedule the backups just like any other important event in your life. I do mine every Sunday, and it's just one of the things that I know, hey, it's Sunday, it's time to do my backups. Put it on your calendar, put reminders someplace, whatever you have to do to remember to do the backups. If you don't do them, it doesn't help. Some drives that I really like, I did a lot of research on external hard drives before I started doing the backups that I do now. I really love Western Digital Elements external hard drives. This is what they look like. You can get a 2 terabyte drive right now for about $62 and a 4 terabyte drive for about $95. And these prices were good a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully they haven't gone up. As I mentioned, something that you can back up to is what's called a network attached storage. These can get pretty pricey. So, you know, if you've got some questions about it, I'd be glad to help you. We do have one of these at work, so I do have a lot of experience with them, but they just cost too much for me to have at home. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using this sort of scheme for backups? Well, it's fast and easy, but can be susceptible to fire or flood, and you have to remember to do them. Another backup strategy is to use online storage. Get yourself an account with Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, pCloud, or any of several others. They'll give you about this much storage for this much money. It turns out for just $70 a year, you can get a terabyte on OneDrive. And just use synchronization software to copy your data up to OneDrive or Google Drive or whatever. And this works well, except all of these services in their terms of service will tell you that if they lose your files, then they'll be sorry, but they're not actually responsible for it. So copying files up to online storage is a great place to have another copy of your data, but it shouldn't be the only copy of your data that you've got. Another strategy is to use an online backup service. I'm a big fan of these. You install specialized software that the service will provide for you on your PC, and it watches for files on your PC to change. And anytime it sees a file change, it copies it up to the online backup service. And all your data is encrypted, so you don't have to worry about anybody seeing it while it's in transit or while it's stored on the service. These are great. Some of them are free, but none of the free ones will actually hold much data, typically 2 to 15 gigabytes, so it's almost never enough. You pretty much have to count on paying for these. Here are the big players in the field: iDrive, Backblaze, CrashPlan, and Carbonite. This little table shows the number of computers that you can back up and how much storage they'll provide for you. You notice that iDrive is unique in that they'll let you back up any number of computers, but the total amount of storage can't be more than 5 terabytes. The other services will only allow you to back up one computer, but it can be any amount of data. So I've used 3 out of these 4. I really like CrashPlan, but they raised their prices a couple of years ago, and you can see they're now the most expensive service. So I would probably look at one of the others. I didn't like them enough to pay $120 a year. So advantages and disadvantages of using online backup services: really easy. You set it and forget it. It's completely immune to fire or flood, because if your house burns to the ground, they've got your data stored up on the internet. They do versioning. So if you decide you need to look at a file the way it was 6 months ago, they'll have a copy of it. Disadvantages: it costs money, and it's an ongoing cost. So you saw that typically anywhere from $50 to $75 a year for most of them. The initial backup can take days, and to do a restore can take days. So let's say your computer gets burned up in a fire. So you get a new computer and you tell your online backup service to do a restore. They have to download from the internet all of your data. And that can it will definitely take hours, and it could take days. Some of them will FedEx you a hard drive so that you don't have to download everything. But doing a restore, getting your data back, can be a big deal. We can also do what's called a system backup. Now, I typically, every Sunday, I only back up my data, but every so often, I like to back up my entire hard drive, including Windows. And I actually do this about every 6 months. And I know you've got another presentation about that today. My 2 favorite services for this are Aomi Backupper will do it, and Macrium Reflect is another great piece of software. And I know you've got a presentation on Macrium Reflect today, so I'm not going to talk about this. And I'm not going to do a demo because they'll do it. The last thing I want to talk about is backing up your phones. And when we talk about backing up your phones, for most people, what we're really worried about is your photos. So a quick story: at work, one of the medical assistants there, her daughter had gotten married a couple of months ago. And so she took her phone, and she was just a shutterbug the whole night. Now, she wasn't the only one taking pictures, but she loves to take pictures, and she took a lot of them, and I got to see a lot of them on her phone. Well, one day she dropped her phone and destroyed it, essentially. It not only shattered the screen, but the phone couldn't be saved. And she did not have the photos backed up anywhere. They were only on her phone, and she lost all of those photos. Now, thank goodness her daughter had a professional photographer, and lots of other people were taking photos as well. But my friend lost all of her photos on her phone. So your photos shouldn't exist only on your phone. And it's amazing that we have to explain this to people, but you'd be surprised the number of people that have photos that don't exist anywhere except on their phone. And you just never should put yourself in that situation. So the easiest ways around that, if you've got iCloud for just about any phone, whether it's iOS or Android, Microsoft OneDrive, you can install that on your phone and it will watch for you taking pictures and will upload them to OneDrive anytime you take a new photo. If you've got an Apple, then iCloud will do the same thing. So you should get and set up at least one of these if you ever take photos on your phone. Don't ever want to be in a position where if your phone gets lost or stolen, you lose all your photos. Occasionally, get the photos off of iCloud or OneDrive and put them on your computer and back them up just like you would any of your other important data files. Some people care about messaging, doing messaging backups. They store a lot of information in text messages that they trade with people. I don't particularly do that. So I don't back up my text messages. I wouldn't particularly be heartbroken if I lost them, but some people would. And so this is an important thing to do. If you do text messaging in WhatsApp or in Signal, then they have a backup feature built in. You can just turn this option on and they'll back up all your text messages for you. If you use regular text messaging, what's called SMS, then there's all kinds of apps you can get in the Apple App Store or on Google Play that will that you can install on your phone, and they'll back up all of your text messages. So that's important to a lot of people, not for me. One important thing about the phone: prepare now for what you would do if your phone is lost. So you should be, while you have your phone in your hand, make a note somewhere of the phone's make, model, what's called the IMEI number, which is the identification number that the telephone company actually uses for that piece of equipment. Write down the telephone company, your service provider's the customer service number. If you got an Apple, write down your Apple ID. If you've got Android, write down your PIN if you've got one. Write all that stuff down now and put it someplace safe. Also, look through your phone at what apps you've got and make a list of all the passwords that you'd want to change if you lost your phone. So if I lost my phone, I'd want to change my OneDrive password, my Facebook password. I'd want to change, what else? My Google password. So I have a list of all the passwords that I would be concerned about if somebody found my phone and could get access to all my apps. And finally, make sure you have an alternate way of handling two-factor identification. So on my phone, for example, if I try to log into Google from a new computer, they send a text message to my phone. Well, that works great right up until I lose my phone. So with Google, there are actually alternative things you can set up so that they'll either text you to your phone or email you or something like that. So you can set up alternative ways so that if you don't have your phone, some of these companies have ways of authenticating that it's you. So if you use two-factor authentication, if you want to talk more about that, we can, then your phone shouldn't be the only way you can do that. Some final thoughts about backup. People often ask me, what do I do? Well, every Sunday, I back up all of my important files to one of 3 external hard drives. And that's where I get, you remember we talked at the beginning, the 3-2-1 rule. And one of the things I said is you should have 3 copies of your data. Well, this gets me 3 copies of my data because each week I rotate to a different hard drive. So I've got 3 hard drives that have complete copies of all my data on them. Every Monday, I take one of those hard drives to work. That's how I get the offsite. So every Monday, I know that there's always a hard drive a backup hard drive that's in my desk at work. Every Monday, I take a different one in and bring that one home. And that way I know that I've always got a copy of all my data at work. My important or active files, things I'm actively working on, are always up in OneDrive as well, and as well as on the external hard drive. And that's how I get the 2 different media, as well as being on 3 different hard drives. My important files are in the cloud, as well as stored on those external hard drives. And then every 6 months, I use Macrium Reflect to make a copy of Windows, so that if I had to completely replace my computer, I could reinstall Windows and be right back to where I was within the past few months. I keep my hard drives in these little cases that I bought on Amazon. They were really inexpensive, little zippered cases to protect them. This is especially important to me because my hard drives are being taken to work on a regular basis. I want to make sure if I drop them, they're well protected. This is what it looks like inside. So they're snuggled inside all this padding. The hard drives I use are 4 terabyte Western Digital Elements portable hard drives. I paid $95 for each of them. I've got 3 of them, so I paid a little less than $300 for all of my backup hard drives. And I have a little log that I fill out each week that looks just like this. So I generated this in Word. And so every time I do a backup, I put the date in it, and it tells me which backup drive I'm supposed to back up to. So on March 26th here, I was supposed to back up to hard drive number 3. Then I was supposed to take hard drive number 2 to work, and I was supposed to bring home hard drive number 1, which should be at work. And so that's my little reminders of which hard drives to use so that they all get rotated through. One last topic that I'm not going to talk about in any detail, I've got an entire presentation on this if you want me to do that sometime, is people frequently ask me, well, aren't you worried that somebody might rummage through your drawer at work and get to your external hard drive, and there's all your tax returns and photos and all of your private information is on that hard drive? Well, no, I'm not worried about it, because I use encryption software for my backups. I use a product called VeriCrypt, which I love, which makes sure that all of my hard drives are encrypted, and if somebody gets a hold of one of them, they won't be able to get any of my data. So all of my hard drives are encrypted with VeriCrypt. As far as the phone, what do I do? I have an Android phone, so I use OneDrive to make sure that all of my photos are backed up. I don't do messaging backups because I don't keep any information stored in my text messages that I would particularly care about. If I lost it, might be an inconvenience, but I make sure that I have any important data that somebody texts me, I put it someplace else immediately. And every 3 months, I have a reminder on my calendar to sit down and review my list of what I would do if I lost my phone. Have I added any new apps that have passwords that I might care about? Is there any information that's not backed up? Is there anybody that I would want to call? Any private information? It's just nice to go over the list every once in a while. Here's a list of all the products and services I've talked about and where you get them. And again, I'll make sure you have copies of these slides available. And the final piece of advice I'll give you is, however you decide to do backups, whether you use an online service, whether you think you might want to use an online service, whether you use external hard drives, whatever you do, just do it. Do something. Don't be one of the majority of people out there that don't do any kind of backup, so that when tragedy strikes their computer, they have no backup. You know, I've often thought that if my house burned to the ground tomorrow, as long as the people got out safely, and as long as I got my cat out safely, the only thing that would really be irreplaceable to me are the files on my computer. That's where all my photos are. It's where all my videos are. All of my memories are there. I'd miss my books, and I'd miss other things that I might lose in a devastating fire. But it's really the files on my computer that I would really, really hate to lose. So just do it and save yourself the heartache. If you'd like to contact me later, there's my email address. You're welcome to drop me a line if you think of any questions that you don't think of right now. And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, Mark, that was great. Again, I really appreciate how well you present and everything. Judy does have some questions, and we will do those questions that were sent into the chat first. And then if there's any time for other questions, we'll do them, or we'll hold them until after our second half presentation. So Judy.
Do you recommend doing a two-way backup sync over the mirror or update options?
So that's an interesting question. I do a mirror, and I kind of glossed over that step as I was setting up free file sync, but that's the one thing that I didn't show you is I would, if somehow a file got changed on the backup, it's hard to imagine how that could happen, but if it did happen, I wouldn't want that change to get put back on my computer. And the way I actually set it up here, that's what would happen. So I would do a mirror, which is, it's just a couple of clicks you got to do in free file sync. And that causes it to say, whatever's on the computer is what ought to be on the backup drive. And if somehow the backup drive gets changed by itself, I don't want that moved back onto the computer. So yeah, a mirror is actually what you want to do.
How many versions of a file does file sync keep?
That's a good question. So it will keep, if you don't tell it otherwise, it will keep an infinite number of changes. And that can actually be a little bit of a problem. If you've got some really large documents that you change constantly, then you are going to wind up with hundreds of versions of that document. One of the things you can tell free file sync is that it's only to keep the last 10 or 20 or however many versions. You can specify anything. You can tell it how many versions of any file to keep. And you can also tell it how much space it's allowed to use for versioning, so that you can say, well, I don't care how many versions you keep, but if it gets larger than, whatever, pick a number, 20 gigabytes, then start deleting the older ones. So you've got some control over that, and most programs will do things like that.
If you just move files around among the folders or delete files or folders without making any changes to the content inside of any of them and run free file sync, will it make those movements or deletions on the backup media as well?
It will. So I don't actually know with free file sync. So we use sync back and good sync at work, and they are smart enough to say, hey, that file that disappeared from here and that other file that appeared over here are actually the same file. And all I need to do on the backup media is rename it. I don't need to actually delete it and then recopy it. I don't know if free file sync is smart enough to do that. It might just see, oh, well, I see one file has been deleted, so I'll delete that one off the backup. And then this other file has appeared over in this folder, so I'll copy it. It might not be smart enough to do a rename, which would be faster if it's a big file.
Mark, it will do the move without having to do a rename. So
will it? Okay.
There's a setting that you have to set to in mirroring to allow the use of the database, and then it will see, oh, that got moved, so I'll move that on your external hard drive.
Excellent. Okay, I'll put that in the instructions on how to set that up. That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
You mentioned using a flash drive. What about the reliability of them in SD cards versus SSD or HDD as an external hard drive?
So I don't know that I know the answer to that. I think a higher end flash drive, I think, is pretty reliable. I don't know about the cheaper ones. I'd be a little reluctant with them. I've got a bunch of flash drives that I bought really cheap off of Amazon, and they work great, but boy, I wouldn't trust them as my only backup, that's for sure. I don't know. John, Judy, you know anything about the reliability long-term of flash drives?
I wouldn't use a flash drive for backing up if you paid me.
Yeah.
They're fragile. You put, your coffee cup hits it and it falls on the floor and you don't have carpeting and boom. Or I've had them just die. They worked today, they didn't work the next day, and everything was gone. And I've
Yeah.
also had them get corrupt.
Yeah.
Like a battery with stuff like that. And I look at it and went, how did that happen? I have no clue, but it's deader than a doornail, and you wouldn't, you'd never want to plug it into anything.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel. I don't have any numbers to back that up, but yeah, I think that's probably right. I think a 2 terabyte or 4 terabyte spinning hard drive is still your best bet for backups.
There's a 2 terabyte. I love Toshiba's. You're a Western Dig guy. I'm a Toshiba lady, and Western Dig is too complex. I don't like all the extra stuff they have on it, but there's a 2 terabyte Toshiba for $69. So look on, Amazon. You probably get your best prices there, and they're always having a sale on something. So
I've had good luck with Toshiba. I would second that one. The one I've had a couple of failures with is Seagate. So I try to avoid Seagate for backup, but Toshiba I've had real good luck with.
Well, I have an old that I don't even think they make anymore, iOmega, that I brought from work, probably however long I've been retired. I look at that every once in a while to get something, and it still runs perfectly.
Yep.
Anyway, over to Gary. We're going to do a few quick raise hand questions, and then we're going to move on.
Okay.
Gary, go. And these are going to be short questions.
Quick question.
You're muted.
Am I not on?
You're
No,
muted.
go ahead, Gary.
Oh, now you're not. Okay. Now you are.
There's 2 Garys.
Which Gary you want?
Gary ODDI. He's first one in line. Sorry, I didn't see there were 2. You're muted, Gary. Oh,
Okay, there it is. Yeah, I think I'm third in line, but it's okay. Two quick questions. Do I understand it right that free file sync will delete a file off of your backup drive if you delete the file on your desktop?
It's an option. I have it set that way. So yeah, with the setting I use, with the default setting, it will. But if you use the versioning, it will keep a copy under the version folder, even though it's deleted it out of the backups folder.
Backup. And my other question is, I use Macrium for my image drive. It seems like it'd be a lot easier just to use free file sync on a regular basis, just to keep everything up to date. Does it make sense just to not use Macrium and just use free file sync, just to make it a lot simpler and up to date all the time, instead of waiting for doing a image backup once a month?
Yeah, so that's what I do. So I do an image backup with Reflect every 6 months, but the rest of the time I'm using either free file sync or good sync.
But can you do a free file sync as an image backup, or use it as an image backup?
No, you cannot back up Windows with free file sync.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Marianne.
Sure.
Marianne, it's your
You're
turn.
muted.
There you go.
Okay, sorry. I heard of Mary, and I actually go by Marianne. I thought there might be a Mary. Anyway, I have heard that Windows 11, you cannot restore using anything that uses the, I'm sorry, I lost the word. Where you go in and out and you connect it to the laptop. The USB port, sorry.
Oh,
Is that true?
I don't know about that. I have to confess, I'm still running Windows 10 at home, and all of our machines at work are Windows 10. So if that's a restriction in Windows 11, I haven't hit it yet.
To me, that would be a Google question that could be answered really well.
It's not. I attached
Or Bill James can answer that.
I attached a flash drive last night when I was playing with my presentation, and it worked just fine on Windows 11.
Thank you. Lloyd Lindsay, you're on.
Yeah, actually, I think you answered the question previously, but I'll just go over this because this is what I've always been concerned about. If you're using this sync type of programs, so what happens is I have a file, it gets corrupted, and then it says, oh, the sync says, oh, it's a different file. It's changed, so you make a copy, but you don't delete the previous copy that's saved. Is that correct?
Well, if you use versioning, then it will keep a copy of the file before you did the backup. And
Right.
so the versioning is really important.
Yes, because somewhere along the line, without my doing it, or maybe I accidentally did it, I've ruined the file. So now it's got a corrupt file. It says, oh, this is different. So you got a corrupted file. And now I want to go back a couple versions back to find the original where it was supposed to be.
Yep.
So you're saying it doesn't delete the previous backups, and that's the important thing.
Right. So it will
Okay.
keep, every time it does a backup, it will, in the versions folder, it will make a copy of all the files it's about to replace. And then it will replace them in the backups folder, but it will keep the original in the versions folder, and you can go back to it at any time.
Thank you.
Gary Bachman, you're on.
Question on the imaging backups. Have you ever actually done a restore from any of those points that you've talked about, any of those software products, and how easy that is to do the actual restore?
Yeah, we've done it both because we've had disasters and we've had to restore it, but also what we will frequently do is if we buy several computers that are all the same model, we'll get one of them set up, and we try to always do that. We'll get one of them set up just the way we want it. We'll take an image, and then we'll use that image to restore on all the other computers. And
Right, that's what we used. Yeah, we used to do the same thing. That's why I'm asking how easy it is to restore. So
yeah, it's pretty easy. It takes 20 or 25 minutes per computer to do it. So it's a kind of a lengthy process, but it works fine. Yes.
thank you very much.
I have one last chat box question. If your backup is on a NAS, is it likely to be affected by ransomware? Might it be safe depending on the backup software? What if it's an image?
What you just described is a big problem. And I would never use a NAS as my only backup for exactly that reason, because it's always connected. And if anybody on your network gets ransomware, that NAS could be toast. So yeah, I would worry about that.
Just like your external hard drive if you leave it plugged in all the time.
That's right. There's a lot to be said for being able to unplug something and put it on the shelf.